And we're back.
Did we do it? Are we there?
I mean, it's questionable if we got it back. There's been a lot of technical issues
I
today.
I
Um,
I can actually see myself on the Twitch. That's
yeah,
good.
basically, the streaming software that we use has a lot of very strange inconsistencies that are not predictable, and it requires me to like reinstall every time I go live. So, uh, all that said, we now have I think, a functional application that is now streaming correctly. I think it's still
Our
not entirely clear, and I'm sitting here
our
like,
fin
go ahead.
our fingers are crossed that we will be able to maintain. I think once we get things going and everything, all the ducks are in a row, it seems to be okay. Well, famous last words, knock on all the wood, like do everything we can. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Either way, I think we're good now.
yeah,
Things seem fine. Hopefully, we have not lost all of our audience due to like technical issues and stopping and starting.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, now we're live. Hopefully, you're stuck around and you'd like to see what we're going to talk about today. So I'll do our usual preamble. We're Sonic Boom Live. We're a bunch of video game industry folks, probably with collective 20, 30 years between both of us, something
Something
like
on that
that.
order. Yeah.
So we've got a bunch of industry experience. What we usually do on our Thursday like live cast, we talk about the industry news, but from an industry perspective. We sort of sometimes we geek out and we do our like, oh, I love this game and our opinions on things. But we like to focus on what's actually going on in the industry, how it affects the industry, and kind of look at the mechanics of the moving pieces that we see day to day. And we usually view through the lens of a fan. We get to kind of put in context, kind of like Bloomberg does or any one of those, but we're way more amateur than that. So hopefully stick
Yeah, yeah.
around
We
for
we did
that.
not graduate from a secondary school or whatever with a journalism degree.
That's for
So
certain.
yeah, we are part of this new wave of media that I have an opinion. Let me broadcast it to the world.
And
Hopefully, our
boy, do we
opinions
have
are
opinions.
informed. Yeah,
No, I mean they are informed opinions.
yeah,
I mean there's a lot we can't know about a lot of things because we're just not that close to the industry. We don't get sources telling us stuff. We're just using our intuition and our years of experience within the industry to say,
yeah.
hey, there's more to this than what fans are saying about it.
And I would say that I personally am not sure that I'd want to be at that point where we're getting sources telling us stuff, because then I would really not necessarily want to like break a story or anything like that. I think our position here is more on an analysis side of things. If we have someone give us extra information or context after something has already been broken, great. We'll happily talk about that. But we don't want to be the ones to break the news and stick our necks out for that. We don't. That's not what we're here for.
Yeah. So with all that said, as much as most people are aware that's following game industry news, um,
Yeah.
it's a topic that's been on everybody's channels, on news articles. It broke, I don't know, uh, early this week, right?
Yeah. 2 days ago, I want to
Yeah,
say. Yeah.
and it's obviously the news that Microsoft is in is in an agreement with Activision for a buyout. Um, that does not mean that it's done deal. It still has to go through regulatory bodies, but as far as Activision's concerned, as far as Microsoft's concerned, there is a agreement to have the buyout happen, and if all things are allowed, then it will go forward, and Microsoft will be the proud owner of its brand old baby, Activision Blizzard.
Yeah.
Um,
As some have said, Activision Blizzard King,
yes,
because that highlights their other third major kind of publishing um, behemoth wing, which is their casual stuff,
yes,
um, i.e. Candy Crush.
Candy Crush
So
and gambling, virtual
right,
gambling, basically.
virtual game. Yep, yep. They do a lot of is it DraftKings them? The like the drafting stuff. I'm
I
no,
don't know.
Maybe I got King and DraftKings confused.
Well, King is certainly the company that brought us Candy Crush that continues to be popular today. I'm sure they're responsible for a lot more, but I follow I don't follow the casual gaming space nearly as closely as I did when it was a big thing like 10 years ago. Yeah, what we plan to do, because this topic has been covered enough times, if you're following the news, you've probably heard it from many reputable sources. Everybody's printed an article about it, and there's been plenty of opinion coverage. What we're going to do today is we're going to kind of do a deep dive on Microsoft.
Yeah.
I think looking at their acquisitions or history of acquisitions, it's very important to look at how they've acquired games or game companies in the past, what happened to those acquisitions, and what they're doing now. Like, what is their larger play? I think most people can figure out, but I think doing a really kind of thorough recap of Microsoft's acquisitions and their major milestones that kind of align in a timeline with those things will be important to give context to our discussion afterwards about what this means for the industry, what this means for Microsoft, and what are our feelings on these things.
Yeah, yeah. And I real quick addendum to what I had said before. DraftKings is not King.
No,
that was different.
They're also a huge company in and of themselves, but
right, yeah, they're an esports sort of gambling companies thing.
Both.
They do
esports,
fantasy
football. Yeah, well, they started with fantasy football and like virtual gambling that was legal at the time, and now it's very legal. But it used to be kind of a questionable area.
Yeah.
All right, so let's just dig into it. We'll cover the main pieces of the buyout first, and then we'll get into the sort of history. So do you want to just give us a once-over on the details of the buyout, Eric?
For the excuse me, for this one, yes. I'm sorry, I was already kind of skipping ahead to the point where we talk about
do you want me to cover it?
All the other stuff. No, it's fine. Okay. Microsoft is buying Activision Blizzard for just over $69 billion, almost $70 billion. Yes. Which, I think, was it a week ago? Like literally our last episode, we were discussing another large buyout by a company. And it was like everyone was like ogling at the $12 billion, $11 billion price tag. It was Zynga. That's right. Yeah. Who bought Zynga?
There's the Zynga buyout just the other day.
Take-Two? Take-Two bought Zynga?
Take-Two bought Zynga. Yeah. To add to like larger valuation of the company, and we had kind of discussed about why a company like Take-Two would be that interested in the casual mobile space, but we sort of hypothesize why it's important for them. So yeah, no, I mean, there's been a lot of gaming. There's been a consolidation. I mean, Let's take a step back. There's been a consolidation of the game industry as a whole over the past 15 years. It's like in bouts and spurts where you'll see Sony make a bunch of acquisitions and they consolidate to Sony Online Entertainment, and this happens all over the place. I mean, even our stomping ground, Boston, went from having like 7 or 8 game companies to having 1, 2, maybe.
Two, yeah. And these are like third-party game developers that aren't married to a specific publisher all the time.
Well, except for like what is WB Games?
Which one is that one? Is that the
it's former EverQuest developers?
Right.
Yeah. I don't like. I'm actually trying to remember if their name's WB Games or if they go by their old name. But yeah, we've seen this before. When we joined in the game industry, the game industry was going under a massive like restructuring, and so many like smaller devs that were in the PS2 era of like, maybe like $1 million games, and producing those and making a good amount of money on them. As the cost of game development went up, we saw like some massive contraction of the of the gaming industry as a whole. There was tons of buyouts. There was conglomerations happening, and now we're at the point where there's
Studios shut down.
Yes, there's a lot of studios shut down where the talent like kind of migrated either from coast to coast or set up new studios with new teams in like Austin was like the new hub when Boston and like New York were kind of flattening out. There's so this is like it's not uncommon, but I think we can say as a whole, especially more recently, there are like small indie space, but there's no medium-sized studios anymore. They are under the umbrella usually of a larger company, and the prohibitive cost of doing like a AAA title has made it so that only the largest game companies play in this space. And for a while, we thought, hey, like EA, Bethesda, Ubisoft, Activision, we're never going to be. Those will be the giants for like the movie studio model. Like those were just going to be what they are. With the acquisition of Activision, we're seeing actually no, even the large studios are subject to be gobbled up at this point.
Yeah, you have behemoths in the industry who are have very specific reasons to get grow their behemoth status to extra behemoth, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how you categorize.
I want to own a significant portion of this entire market. That's what my goal is. So I'm going to. We'll get into that later.
Yeah.
Right? This is just the sort of a trend throughout the history, and in the past, this was driven by Justin mentioned PS2 switched to transition to the PS3 era with Xbox to Xbox 360. That transition happened because, as Justin said, cost of games went up. To make a full AAA 3D title that had story, it had direction and beautiful art and everything, like the cost of just producing all that content is skyrockets. And then with that price increase, you get investors and publishers who are not willing to risk a flop of a game. They just can't do it. So at the same time, you get this shrinking of large games that come out. That's why around that time we started to coalesce around certain Call of Duty IP and Medal of Honor and Battlefront and Battlefront.
It's now Battlefront and Call of Duty as like the main shooter war titles.
Right, and they are continuously profitable so far. But you have that situation, and it's very hard for other studios to come up and get to that scale without a sugar daddy like Sony, who comes in and says, we like what your team is doing, we're going to bring you in and we'll have you work on a few small projects, learn the system, we're going to then pump you full of cash for a bigger title that we're now confident that you can manage. And don't worry, we have all these other studios where we're going to assign as needed as your project nears completion. We'll assign more people to you. Like, we've got this, don't worry about it. They have a whole structure that's built to enable that type of development. And that's something that they put together and nurtured and built over the years. It's not something that smaller studios, even a 100-person studio on its own, can do without significant external support. Ubisoft, by the way, with Assassin's Creed and some of those other titles, they can do it because they have like 12 studios across the world, 12 or more or something like that, where they can pull in developers as a project is nearing completion and just get tons of people on it.
Yeah, this is like famously like a Take-Two position or Rockstar, but like their open world games, Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead.
Already, yep.
Yeah, you see, you'll see even like in the credits, you'll see the support from all of the studios, including a Boston one, because I think we have Rockstar East,
North.
Yeah,
I think it's called Rockstar North. Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, we see support from all these studios like pour in to do asset creation, QA, and you have different studios, satellite studios that specialize in a function. So you'll see one that's like largely responsible for QA, another that's largely responsible for asset production or asset like concepting. You have one that will be doing testing of assets that are coming from a third party asset developer from like China who's just doing modeling work for them. And you have another group that handles all that incoming assets and optimizes for the game, and then you have the lead studio that's putting all those things together and finalizing a build.
Yep.
And this is a structure that's like we said, Take-Two, Rockstar has this sort of working with for them. Ubisoft does. EA does and doesn't. Like, they have a supportive studio system, but they also have like their individual like Respawn, for instance, is its own kind of operates on its own and seeks support from EA, but EA I think is less structured like say Ubisoft or Take-Two Rockstar is.
Right. And the sense that I get from Ubisoft from, seeing GDC talks and whatever is that they have like multiple teams working on the same game, taking parts of it and building the game together over, across the entire world. When they say at the beginning of Assassin's Creed, this was made by a multicultural, they're not kidding. Literally, like basically all the time zones. But with EA, it's like, no, they'll have one studio. It's more like what Sony does, what we described as Sony's model, where one team manages most of it, and then they'll have people from other teams swoop in as necessary.
Yeah, swoop in, and then they usually have shared asset areas like,
yes,
like a motion
an
capture
engine.
lab. Yeah, an engine.
Yep.
Stuff like that.
So there's a whole asset development and game development pipeline that the major publishers develop. This is something certainly Take-Two has. Excuse me, we're not talking about Take-Two. Well, Take-Two, yes, but Activision Blizzard for sure, and even Blizzard by themselves probably have the Blizzard part of Activision Blizzard. Almost certainly has their own like building for doing mocap and all that other stuff. So it's. All of these major publishers are all about kind of giving their games the games that they're publishing the best chance at succeeding in the market, and doing cross germination of expertise, as the saying goes. So that kind of was a huge shift that started in the kind of mid to late aughts.
Yeah, it's PS3 generation generally is where we started seeing this change in the game development environment, where a lot of the middle-sized studios disappeared, and the larger like multifaceted global studio, which is like what we were saying is broken up by 5 or 6 different supporting studios for one game. That's what developed out of the PS3 era, in large part due to the ballooning development costs.
Yeah, and I would argue that in the PS4 and Xbox One era, a lot of what happened in that space was, you could get more active and more productful. Is that a word? No, productive. There you go. More productive. Wow. More productive indies. Yeah. And because of the improvements that were made in from both sides of the industry, right? You had on the engine side, the technology that's used to make games, massive improvements in sort of a unification of what assets look like, the tools you use to develop them, improved to a point where you don't really need to be a AAA developer to make an absolutely gorgeous scene. To fill that scene 1,000 times, yes, you're going to need AAA backing just to create all the asset content. Yeah. But if you have a small scope, you can still create something absolutely beautiful and do it, and people scratch their heads and say, how'd you do that? Oh, we're a 3-person team. Yeah. Doable. That wasn't something that was doable before. The other side of this, which sort of enabled that, is that the consoles sort of coalesced in their hardware, the major ones, Xbox One and PS4, whereas Nintendo was off doing its own thing with the Wii U. With those two consoles, their hardware sort of coalesced to be almost identical.
Yeah, like almost identical.
Number differences.
Right. Performance differences, but architecture nearly the same.
Dramatically simplified for the game engine developers to say like, oh, great, we don't have to like do all these micro optimizations and yet another assembly language. Great, we can just use the stuff that we already figured out. All of these how loads and stores work on this other stuff. Great, cool. We'll just pull that in. or well, maybe with some micro adjustments, but whatever. The point is that all of this came together to enable this sort of like the indie market to rise. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. People just like to make games in their free time and whatever. But what we're seeing now is this sudden market transition towards sort of like a Netflix style, everyone's always online, always online. And it's a really sweet deal to be able to just say, like, I just want to play the latest games. Yeah, here's a bunch of money every month. I'll just pay you about you. I just want to be able to access what I want. Like, I don't have to sit there and individually hunt for deals and wait for a game to come down specifically on price. I just want to pay you a bunch of money and then have access to all the games, like Netflix or Disney Plus or all those other things. So Microsoft has been moving in that direction.
What I actually add, even outside of the like potential wider strategy, is
sure
this is like, I think, the first step in like a mega developer. Like Google and Apple kind of are mega developers in the sense that they're a publishing platform or the platform holder, exclusive platform holders for a lot of game publishing, and they get a penny for every time an ad is opened on a game app, allowing them to wield huge amounts of the mobile market. But in the console space, it's always been kind of fractured among 5 or 6 major publishers, and then like sort of like this roiling of companies building out a massive game, that flopping, that company goes away, or they get bought out, or that game's a massive success, and then they're primed to be purchased by another developer, or they eventually get to this point like Bethesda kind of did, with being like a larger like a cluster of small studios forming one larger publishing group with the success of Fallout and whatnot. But
Mass Effect. And
generally, like now we've seen this sort of like cream's floated to the top, everything in the middle's gone, and then you have the indies down where they are, and now we're beginning to see kind of like the space where the indies are going under publishing groups as well. So you see like Devolver Digital, Annapurna, like now publishing lots of indie titles and making a lot of money that way. So yeah, that's like the industry's gone from lots of middle now to massive, and now the indie is kind of like stratifying itself, but the indie space is kind of a very active area right now, whereas the top end kind of has stagnated for a bit. This move by Microsoft is now looking to be like an even stranger move, where like this is mega game company, mega publisher that wields, as estimated, like about 10% of the video game market as a whole, which is nuts.
By that measure, do you mean video game market as in
I think this includes
total sales or total IP and like games shipped for a certain class of game?
I think it's sales.
Yikes.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
It's a massive acquisition. Like their portfolio now has multiple $1 billion worth of game companies within it.
Oh yeah.
So this is a new development. It's a weird development, and as we'll get into it, as we've dragged it out quite a bit, we'll kind of hypothesize what this means for the industry as a whole. But to be sure, this is like an unprecedented move that we've seen sort of coming, but we didn't think it would make this sort of leap as it did. With the Bethesda buyout, we're just like, oh, well, that's a big company, but maybe that's all they're willing to stomach. And then you see an Activision acquisition, you're like, nope, they're willing to stomach a lot more. And this is startling for the industry. So we'll talk about that in a bit. Let's get on with breaking down Microsoft's history of acquisitions and milestones that kind of align with those things. We are not going to focus on like pre-Xbox Microsoft, because Microsoft, although they've been in the PC space, were never really in the gaming space until the Xbox, or like not in earnest. There was a Microsoft games Division.
Yeah.
It was the people who were responsible for like Flight Simulator and a handful of other things. Yeah, MechWarrior was one of their early acquisitions,
Yeah.
but these are all pre-Xbox, and I think Xbox as a starting point. Go ahead.
They did Windows Pinball.
Windows Pinball, Winball.
Actually, I'm not sure if that was done under that publishing wing. It's probably just a developer at Microsoft.
But they had a handful of games, but they really were kind of dabbling, and it wasn't until the Xbox that things started changing. I think with the and you'd probably see this in their documentary.
Yeah.
But there was a real push. There's a real reluctance to get into the game space for a long time. And it wasn't until the PS2 Success where Sony started saying, we'll have an entertainment console in every living room. And I think this rocked Microsoft and Ballmer and Gates into finally accepting that they can make a standalone console because there's something inherently more, well, not necessarily even more attractive, but more user-friendly as a standalone box that's supposed to be in the entertainment console compared to a PC that's a multi-functional thing that has an awful UI for entertainment purposes.
Yeah, this is, by the way, back in the days of Windows 98 and SE and Windows 2000, where you had to deal with constant driver problems, blue screens of death, all manner of gotchas. And also, if you had built your own computer, as both of us did around that era, firmware updates and problems between the firmware of the BIOS and the motherboard and Windows. And you're like, okay, great. Real quick, I will say that actually, I won't say that yet. Go ahead, Justin. Please continue. I was going to say this. You did mention PS2, the PS2 era. They would have had to start this during the PS1 era. When you said that as a clarification, did you mean that like when they were talking up the PS2 and the next PlayStation is going to be the big thing?
Yeah, well, so basically the PS2 was known at this point. And the Xbox was on a very short development timeline comparative to like say PlayStation 2's development timeline. So the PS1, for those of you who may not have grown up in that generation, was like, just like the PS2 was like 120 million seller and was only gaining steam towards its last legs. And so with the PS2, Sony was pretty amped about what they'd be able to do with another console that was able to seize that sort of success, especially it was more focused towards a multimedia platform. And this was the push for Microsoft to be like, nah. And the Xbox itself comes out after the PS2 does anyways by, I think, 2 years? I think it was 2 years.
Was it?
I think it was 98 was...
No. PS2 was like 2001, I want to say. Was it 2002? No, 2000. October 26, 2000.
Yeah.
And
so, so 2000 is when PS2 is launched. Xbox is announced in January 2001, and then eventually launches in November 2001.
You are correct, though. The Xbox was introduced on November 15th, 2001, and then it didn't launch until 2002, I believe.
It was late year 2001. It basically
released on November 15th, 2001. Oh, it was 2002 in Japan.
Yeah. So
2001.
What's interesting about the whole thing is that Xbox was not a strategic move until it had to be a strategic move. And what you saw around this time was a bunch of gear shifting in Microsoft's strategy towards games. So this is kind of like where we're starting at. So just before it's at the point in which the PlayStation 2 is already announced, the success of PlayStation 1 is clear, and Sony as a electronics company is changing their position on what a game console can be, and this motivates Microsoft. Part of this is them going after Bungie in 2000, which had been like a Mac developer almost exclusively up to that point. Not exclusively. Their latest set of games were Mac developed games. And Halo, which was in development, Microsoft snaps that up with the promise that this can be one of their launch games, and it is, of course. And probably one of the only reasons why the Xbox was as successful as it was is that Halo was good, like really good, and that was a strategic buy for them. Around the same time, actually, it was later reported that Microsoft was in talks to buy Nintendo as well in 2000, and basically were like laughed out of the room. But like this was Microsoft's kind of like slapdash solution to it. It's like, let's get into games, but let's buy the games to make this successful and get this going. Bungie obviously is a success, not because of Microsoft's development, but Microsoft saw the opportunity of the game, gave them the final funding, and got that as a launch game on the Xbox, even when the Xbox division was really in its infancy. Turn 10 is purchased in 2001. They end up being responsible for the Forza Motorsports games. And by the end of 2001, Xbox is out on the market, and people are having fun making fun of aspects of it. Because it really is controller. Like a weird thing.
Yeah, it's a huge box. Its power supply is massive, if I recall correctly.
Its
or
controller was
is
massive.
It built in? Yeah, that's right. The power supply of the 360 was comically large. Yes. I think it might have been built in on the original Xbox, but the original Xbox box was like
it was a PC. It was like a
PC. Yeah, it was just a horizontal PC. It's just large.
And it was largely built like one too. Like they went after some amount of custom silicon, but they work with Intel on it.
I think it was like an Intel 800 megahertz Pentium processor, like a Pentium 3 or something.
The core of it was the graphics processor was custom.
Yeah,
which was largely based off of stuff that was already out, but it had some technology in it that wasn't like widely available on the PC market, and awfully it wasn't available on the PlayStation 2. So this is like cutting edge of 3D graphics at the point in time. I recall the Xbox being able to do normal maps, which the PlayStation 2 was not able to do.
Yep. Correct.
Or bump mapping.
One of the two. Normal mapping became a thing, I want to say, in like 2003, 2004. Yeah. It was bump mapping.
So I'll break this down by eras so you can pick up on the 360 era. So the Xbox is launched now. They go after Rare, which at that time was a successful Nintendo developer who had done GoldenEye. Well, with their run of N64 games, were showing good capability making shooter games on like a controller with GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, and then there was like the platformer games like Conkers and Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah. So real quick, we'll come back to this, but just a pin in this here. It seems as though the critical reception of Rare's games developed under Nintendo was generally high. This is my recollection. Generally higher than the critical reception of their games under Microsoft. We'll come back to that.
Yes. And towards the end of the Xbox, Xbox Live Arcade is launched in 2004, and is actually quite successful. It serves as the model that PlayStation ends up following for the PS3, then it's really gets swung into high gear on the Xbox 360. And then the Xbox 360 is announced in 2005. So during the first era of Xbox, in order to have a functional console that could be competitive with the PS2, with almost no foundational work, is they went after company after company, and they went after some pretty big ones that everybody was like, I thought these were like exclusive to this console. Like in the case of Rare, it's going from Nintendo to Microsoft. Yeah. Bungie, which questionable. It was a Mac developer. I think they were getting money from Apple to have the Marathon games on their platform, but they weren't exclusive to them by any means. And Turn 10 was like a fairly little known studio for the most part. But Yeah, you can see that like they went after these large studios to get their portfolio built up quickly, and they also went after IP uh, exclusivity rights. Like you see the beginning of this, you'll make it exclusively for us for a period of time, and so you kind of saw that with a few games. But there was like a lot of like deals with Sega, for instance. There was probably a secret buyout meeting that never happened there as well. But when Sega abandoned the Dreamcast, a lot of the titles that we enjoyed on the Dreamcast made their exclusive sequels on the Xbox only. So Jet Set Radio Future, Project Gotham. There's a handful of other ones that I'm blanking on, but basically Sega had agreed to exclusively. Panzer Dragoon was another one. Sega had agreed to exclusively make sequels on the Xbox as a way to bolster their Xbox's standing as a competent gaming platform.
Right, and guaranteed that there were money exchanged hands for that deal.
Yeah, I think there's exclusive publishing rights, right? Like that they paid to have, and probably paid a lot of money to have. So as we get into the Xbox 360 era, I'll let you take this part over, Eric.
Sure.
Xbox 360 is their arguably most successful console.
So far, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So why don't we get into that, Eric?
All right, cool. So they announced the Xbox 360 in 2005, sort of the springtime. It releases in November 2005, and then in 2006 they pick up Lionhead Studios, which I believe Peter Molyneux over in England the UK, and they had up to that point largely been a PC only developer.
Yeah,
they
Fable
are the ones.
Was the one that was like the big one. I think that probably proved to Microsoft that they were worth buying. But other than that, like Black and White.
Yep, Black and White. That's the last one. I mean, the last PC title from them that I had. And at any rate, so like this happened in 2006. We'll come back to Lionhead. In the meantime, there are a series of internal studio closures and reorganization to sort of focus on motion games and experimental tech. This is in 2009. At this point, Nintendo has proven that there is a ridiculously large market for motion controls with the Wii. They just blew up part of the industry with that and sort of opened the world's eyes to this concept of a casual market.
Yeah.
And up to that point, this really didn't exist. People played solitaire on their computer all the time. People had little janky games on their like Razr phones and whatever, but there really hadn't been a concerted understanding of, there is this huge, like massive market of games out there that is available for somebody to tap into. And Nintendo found it with the Wii. So Microsoft said, we can do motion stuff. And they did Project Natal, which was Kinect. And that was announced in June of 2009, and it was launched in June of 2010. This is all during the Xbox 360 era.
And I'll add too, like around this 2009 restructuring, it was an internal restructuring. So it's not that they got rid of Bungie or anything like that. They had a handful of internal studios that they collapsed, and they put a significant effort going, we'll take our internal resources and focus it on motion control and experimental gameplay areas that we clearly did not predict, with the Nintendo, and now we have to catch up to and come out with their own thing. And actually, the tech in Natal was a buyout as well.
It was, I believe, an Israeli company.
Yeah.
So what's interesting here is Justin and I were both working at studios that were working on Natal game. Like it was known as Natal, but didn't have a brand name yet at the time that we were both sort of working on these titles. Microsoft had a internal set of things. Like one of the things that they showed off to developers that they were trying to court and gain interest here was interviews with some of their kind of first party studios. And they had, for instance, Peter Molyneux do this talk and create a series of videos of all the cool things that he was planning on doing with Kinect. There's a famous video somewhere where he's like interviewing this virtual kid.
Yeah, like an avatar child.
Avatar child, yeah, and like have an AI conversation with the kid because Natal also had voice recognition and all that other stuff, and gesture awareness, and it was all very highly experimental. But they shipped this around to other game developers as a way to try to get people interested, and they also had a budget. They were going around and courting game developers, development studios, to say, here's this cool new tech. We have a big budget of money that we're willing to put into game projects. Please make some games. Pitch us. We're going to have a pitch competition. And both Justin, where Justin was working at the time, where I was working at the time, both got into that competition and had various amounts of success. Regardless, that was the big Kinect thing. That was a huge undertaking by Microsoft. As Justin pointed out, like the restructuring leading into it, they went big into it.
Yeah, I think they're pretty... As you said, the Wii's like wild success and like unpredictable success at that, because the GameCube was not a large success for Nintendo. In fact, it was like some of the few years that Nintendo reported losses was during the GameCube era. The Wii was like blowing up in both. I mean, it's not just Microsoft, but Sony as well. Were like, hey, we have to take motion control seriously. Microsoft figured they could buy their way into this technology. Success with this technology, and having a more novel and more complete solution than what Wii was able to do with their nunchuck controllers.
To be fair, the Kinect technology was really cool by itself. As a foundation on which to make games, that's a different question.
Yeah.
Like, as someone who likes technology, cool. It's a very, very cool tech. No doubt.
In a company that was developing for the Kinect at the time, the assessment I even had back then was, I do not see how you can use this to be the future of gaming, because there's fundamental limitations to the way it functioned. I'm like, it works well for racing games, it works well for stationary games, or games where you're not moving around as anything. But as soon as you try to break that wall, like, things go real wonky real quickly with the Kinect. And so I don't know if it was half baked, but there was a lot of money behind a push for hardware that really was not as developed as it needed to be this sort of next generation of video game control.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been good if they had treated it the way Sony did the Move controllers, where it was like, this is sort of a you can play with it, you can optionally add it to your game, but it's a cool tech. We have some demos. It's not required. Like, have fun, like, show us what you can do. That would have been fine. Microsoft pushing so hard for like making it out to be the next best thing was like sort of a tough pill to swallow at some point. I mean, even just, I remember working on a menu system for a game and being like I'm trying to figure out how to get this to recognize, I just want you to scroll left and right, like timer based stuff. And like the fact that I have to hold my hand out and up for a long period of time, that after like 10 seconds of that, you're like, I'm so tired. Just give me the controller and hit the button.
And not only
it's
that,
so much easier.
Everything was fuzzy. Like everything that the Kinect did was
one.
Yeah, was like it was always inconsistent data. So like you'll find like a lot of the old Kinect games, like you'd be like, I need to select something, and it'd be like, hold up your hand and wait over it and keep waving your hand, and then we can say, yep, they're definitely reaching for this now, and it's a selection. Because there was just errors in the way it would output data, and not only that, but like its skeletal system, which was what was used to track body motion, and it was an API system that was, or a set of APIs that was set up with the development, would just lose data periodically. It'd just be like, I don't know where anything is, and now the skeleton's gone. Or it'd be like, your hand's up here, and then you got like the skeleton doing this below it. So it was wonky.
Yeah. So anyway, they eventually worked most of those issues out, particularly with the Kinect 2. It got a lot better, but regardless, we'll come to the Kinect 2. At any rate, Twisted Pixel was picked up in 2011. So this is, the year after Kinect had launched. They were an early indie studio that did Explosion Man and
and also one of the major successes on Xbox Live Arcade. Like, it was relaunched on Xbox Live Arcade, which If anybody is unaware what that was, it was a platform for self-publishing on Xbox
Yeah.
Live, because there's this whole, uh, you know, store that you could purchase games on. This was largely success. They expanded on the 360, and Explosion Man and the stuff that was coming out of Twisted Pixel were like hugely successful. Microsoft picks them up right away within the early success and becomes part of the Microsoft Studio brand.
Right. And shortly after that, Bungie pulls the parachute and leaves. They drop the Halo franchise along with them. I think this is shortly after, I want to say, Halo 3 launches. They weren't the Halo 4 developers, right?
They were Halo 4 and
was,
Halo Reach, but it was after they split.
right.
So
That's
part
right,
part
Reach.
of their leaving deal was we have to give up our IP, and they're responsible for development of 2 more Halo games.
Right. So Bungie split with Microsoft, and that is the beginning of another slate of internal studio closures. And the thought here is that this round is possibly due to lackluster performance of the Kinect hardware sales, and Microsoft's casual game performance overall. And generally, the overall games, Microsoft Games division not being viewed terribly with much. It doesn't spark joy at this time.
Yeah, basically
certainly,
what you have is like their deals with Epic to create Gears of War is working perfectly fine. Their agreement with Bungie also working fine. And Peter Molyneux at Lionhead was able to create at least Fable 2, which was amazing, but Fable 3 kind of is not as well received. And their internal studios, Bungie Leaves. There's a lot of internal rumors about how poor it was to work under Microsoft at the time, and that's part of the reason why they're just like, we don't want to do this anymore. Why they would leave behind Halo, and even just having to keep cranking out Halo games. I think they were kind of
my understanding at the time, at least the more public facing aspect of this was less of the Microsoft was terrible to work for. Those types of conversations would have been like sort of hush hush, but the conversation of we've done 5 or 6 Halo games, we've spent the last decade plus making Halo, because even by the time Microsoft bought Bungie, they'd been working on Halo for a couple of years. So
and they were being driven to release them faster and faster without any appreciable change to them. And I think this is kind of what burnt out Bungie from wanting to continue to work under Microsoft.
Yep, they were like, we're gonna do something new, and of course they went off to do Destiny, but So a few years later, Microsoft comes in and announces the Xbox One, and we won't really go into that launch because I think we've covered that on this channel before.
But I think one thing that's worth noting about that, though, is Microsoft famously doubles down on Kinect, even though its reception was not great. There was only a handful of titles that people actually enjoyed, most of which came from the company I was working at. And
Harmonix.
Yeah. But largely, like, no one was really adopting the Kinect or really enjoying the type of games Kinect offered. Their big thing at this point is, nope, we're going to double down. We're going to fix the issues that were there with Kinect, latency issues for game development, and we're going to make this part of the console, which on paper seems like a good idea. If you want someone to adopt the hardware, if the hardware comes with it, then developers don't have to waver about, if we make a game for the Kinect, only X amount of, like X% of the actual game base that owns an Xbox can actually buy this. So if it's with everyone, a game developer can look at the Kinect and say, well, everybody who owns an Xbox owns a Kinect. Regardless, it ramps up the price. It adds a piece of hardware that critically is not loved by the gaming community because it failed to really materialize the promises that Microsoft was making in terms of how it was going to change the way we gamed. And I don't think anybody was going like, this kind of weird and fuzzy way of interacting with games is perfect for Halo. It wasn't. It's not the type of thing you want for Halo. It was the type of thing that you would be fine with a music game that judged your dancing, but it was terrible for the thing that you need like split-second accuracy for. So
Yeah.
gamers weren't thrilled about this. It prices $100 above the PlayStation 4. PlayStation 4 is more performant than the Xbox One is, and as soon as it was put in by 2013 was when Xbox One was announced. By 2014, they're like, we're not bundling it with the Xbox anymore, and this kind of marks a transition with the way Microsoft was handling things. Again, I'll reiterate, the last part of the 360 era, a ton of money was put towards creating new Kinect experiences and not towards creating games that people loved. Like Fable 3 was not great, and then the next thing Molyneux was showing off was like a version of Fable that no one really was like hyped about. And Bungie was famously splitting from the parent company, not wanting to make Halo anymore. Gears of War was done by Epic, and Epic could at any point in time, at some point maybe, like decide to move away from that. Gears ends up, the IP for Gears ends up staying with Microsoft anyways, but Epic ends up breaking their partnership with Microsoft to develop Gears games, and it goes into internal development. So talking about the Xbox One, 2014, they go on another IP acquisition spree. What's interesting here is they're not buying studios. They're buying the IPs for games that they choose to develop. Gears of War, like I said, is one of them. State of Decay is bought off of, I think, Undead is the name of the studio that was making it. And the Rise series, Rise of Empires, that sort of game ends up being acquired. The Rise game's more PC focused than Xbox, but still. The next big one we see is Mojang, famous for the only game. Well, not the only game. They've made like 2 or 3 games, but their major one being Minecraft, which again was a surprise success. What an open world and open like user-generated content platform could do. And at the time, the acquisition was massive. It was a $2.4 billion acquisition for an indie studio. Was crazy. Everybody was like, that's nuts. But this adoption of Mojang switches the perspective on how Microsoft is handling things. They knew they had a massive success on their hands, and they knew the way they were interacting with their internal development teams was not yielding great success. So them looking at Mojang and the success of Minecraft, they're like, do what you do. Can you keep releasing to the platforms that you release on? So now we have a Microsoft published game that is being released to Android, being released to Windows phones as well, but on Windows, on PlayStation, on it's on everything. And they didn't want to tilt the cart on that one. They just said, look, it's pulling in tons of money. We just need to fuel their creative vision and let them run with it. This is a good thing. By the way.
Yeah. Also, just and really, really quickly, just to be fair, as a part of that, one of the reasons that they wanted to get, as I understand it, one of the reasons that they were willing to buy Minecraft for such a huge sum was that they saw it as a game that they could use to port. They could get their teams to port it into other platforms. That's why early on you saw one of the first things that you saw with the HoloLens was they're like, look, we put Minecraft in HoloLens. And it was a way for them to get this really popular experience and be able to put it wherever they wanted to try out these experiments and do all this. So that's one of the angles that they were thinking, more on okay, what can we do with this? But also to your point, Justin, wow, we've spent a lot of money on this. We don't want to screw it up. Like,
Right.
wow, that would be embarrassing.
Yeah, and it's like turning a new leaf for them. Like I don't think any
Yeah,
of the slate
yeah,
of acquisitions prior to that really panned out for them. And this was a way for them to turn a new leaf. Like, what can we learn about developing games with external studios that we've now brought indoor under our publishing arm? How do we not mess it up, and how do we create a repeatable model? Because with the Xbox One, famously, there are not that many games that end up being released during that era, and you can see in the sales of the console, like it just doesn't pan out for them. And this is bad because the Xbox
yeah,
360 was a huge success, uh, with large parts of its life was actually outselling PlayStation. It was only
yeah.
because of like international sales of the PlayStation really was able to overtake the Xbox 360. But for a long period of time, Xbox was the crown, and certainly in the U.S. it was competitive with the PS4, frequently outselling it. And to see like the sort of flip around with the Xbox One, there was a lot of internal faults being made.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I mentioned earlier we would come back to Rare, and when I called that out, I specifically said like Nintendo, Rare did amazing stuff, and under Microsoft, they did less amazing stuff.
Yeah,
At
their
least
Perfect Dark game was
according to the
not well
critics.
received. Their Banjo
Right,
game was
right,
not well
and
received.
not well received. Yeah, and this is. Um, I don't know. I wasn't in the room, but my read of it is, and my understanding here is that Nintendo, from other conversations with reports from developers like Retro Studios, who is a second-party Nintendo developer in the intervening years, Nintendo is an exacting publisher. They go in, they send Miyamoto, like they'll have everybody on their creative leads and their executives go in and provide feedback and be exacting. They're like, no, this game is not fun yet. We are going to delay the game and make sure that it is good before it ships. And they'll give creative criticism, they'll give ideas, and they'll give feedback. They're very hands-on, as I understand it. Um, Microsoft seemed to be like, great, you guys made all those wonderful games. Just do it again, but for us.
Yeah, and,
And
and
then
on stricter
without that,
timelines, for that
right,
matter,
and
right?
without the feedback, right? They weren't getting the feedback and the creative direction and that interplay, which turns out to be a really important part of the creative game development process.
Yes. And it's likely one of the reasons Bungie splits from them. Like they weren't able to do the
Yeah,
creative things that they wanted to, and they're being asked to continue to just like crank out the game that you've made before. And at some point, that's not creatively interesting to anybody,
oh yeah,
and forces these sort of reckonings where they're just like, I'm not dealing with this anymore. But with the acquisition of Minecraft, and Microsoft gives Minecraft its own group to produce under. Probably one of the best things that ever happened with that is Phil Spencer, who's ends up being like the leader of that group and ends up running Minecraft successfully, and it's one of their few successes during that era, in the Xbox One era. Um, so shortly after Mojang
Mojang.
is acquired in 2015, Twisted Pixel, they break from Microsoft. They say bye to them. Lionhead ends up getting shuttered in 2016 due to, well, they were pulled onto Connect, and I think the last game that they were working on was a Fable game, and Microsoft wasn't pleased with that. In a bunch
Progress
of other,
goes slow.
yes, and a bunch of other internal studios ended up getting shuttered too. I'm not saying that was a bad idea business wise. They probably thought it was a good idea, and for all purposes, like what was actually being produced out of that. At the same time, some of the talented groups within there end up getting spun into like 343, who ends up taking on Halo, and a bunch of things like that. So that goes on. Connect officially gets fully canned in 2017, which you might be saying, hey, if they stopped bundling it in 2014, why did it take till 2017? 2017, Connect was still being used in like novel VR purpose uses, and a lot of experimental gameplay areas that were basically you could take a Kinect and plug it into something else, get the drivers running for it, and you could play around with, these sort of fairly expensive infrared lidar-esque projection systems. Now it's kind of productized in every single Apple phone, but prior to that, it was pretty expensive. So this was a good way for developers who want experimentation to be able to get their hands on this tech. But it's officially is done in 2017. Like the push behind Microsoft and within the Xbox game division, and I'll emphasize the Microsoft side of it. Like their business teams were pushing on this because there's a lot of weird synergy between Microsoft Windows development and the Xbox brand that for a long time kept their hooks into the games division in a way that was detrimental. This shown through with the Kinect, and there's a lot of hope for that. And it was the case with the Xbox One with its launch going like, this is what it's going to be. It's going to be a media device, and everybody's like, it's a gaming device, and I want it to be a gaming device, and you guys don't get it. And I'd still say that their executive team of Microsoft didn't really get it.
Well, that's the thing. That's exactly the point. That at that time, at the beginning of the Xbox One's life, the reason it has the name Xbox One is because the last major initiative that Steve Ballmer pushed at Microsoft was the One Microsoft initiative.
Yes.
They wanted to bring everything together and have, Office, the Office team, the Windows team, the gaming team, the Xbox, essentially, like all of that stuff sort of under one roof and working together. And a lot of that said, that was the drive behind, okay, what can we do to the Xbox to make this a part of this? We'll make sure that there's a Kinect in it. We'll make sure that it can handle TV. We'll put Skype in it. We're going to do like all of these things that they showed off on their very weird E3 announcement there, like on stage. And it got the name Xbox One because of that initiative internally. And then at some point, like I think Ballmer was he left shortly after that shipped and everything happened.
There was some Microsoft internal reorganization after this. Yeah.
Yes. And one of the very quick things that they did was try to like, oh my God, Xbox is like, no one's buying it. It's super expensive. And like none of the game developers are like, this is a laughing stock because there's the joke about I'm online with a game friend and you have your something covering your Kinect because it was like required to turn on your machine, like back in the day, something like that. It had to be connected. And so you would just say like, give it the command to go to sleep over the wire, and then suddenly everyone would drop off on multiplayer games because their Xbox has picked up your voice. So like there's all this craziness about like, well, why are we what's the point? Anyway,
as much as
this is the landscape that we're in.
And it was dismal for Microsoft for a while. In fact, they had considered killing the Xbox brand as a whole. But one of the smartest things they did, which was getting Phil Spencer, who himself was a game development veteran from game studios, like actual game studios, not from like weird executive groups that started the Dreamcast or had moved around or any number of things.
Very similar to the way Sony has Mark Cerny.
Yes, because prior to that they had Kaz, which, to be fair, was was responsible for the PS2, but ended up trying to do like some sort of Sony synergy with the PlayStation 3, and that largely backfired.
This was a thing, for Sony had their one Microsoft moment with one Sony, where like the PlayStation 3 cell chip was supposed to power the next generation of all their TVs and all of their other stuff. Like they wanted the one processor to like change the future and become a networked processor. The PS3 was literally going to be one of many that would like work together in this compute environment. Was sort of like the sales pitch at some point there. It never happened, of course, and it caused a lot of. Anyway, moving on.
Yes, bad corporate energy there, and it weighed down on the Xbox One pretty heavily.
Yes,
but the smart thing they did, which was place Phil Spencer in the Minecraft group he ends up getting pulled up to be executive vice president of Microsoft Games, which basically is Xbox, is the Xbox Game Group, and he gets promoted in June 2017. At the same time, you see the announcement of Xbox Game Pass in June 2017, and I think this is probably where you see the infancy of Microsoft today, where they're seeing successes in services with the start of Xbox Live and now in Xbox Live Gold. Game Pass gets launched, and you see this kind of shift in the way that they're gaming. And as much as people like to hail Phil Spencer as bringing Xbox back to being an Xbox game machine, I don't think he's there for that. I think he's there for redirecting the Xbox group as a whole in a brand new path that we're seeing play out today. But we'll get to that. In 2018, January 2018, Microsoft announces that their Game Pass platform will now get first-party games day and date. So now we see from this small umbrella of Xbox published games, if you're a Game Pass subscriber, you will get access to those games without having to pay $50, $60 to play them. You get them with this one pass, and this is the now strategic movement we're beginning to see that brings us to today. Along the lines, Ninja Theory in 2018, they end up getting bought out. This is, again, a small studio, but a very promising studio. They last worked on Devil May Cry, which had not gone well. And prior to that, there was kind of a handful of small games that, while critically loved, we just didn't get the sort of traction it should have. And then their internal development was working on blanking on the name of the game. Hellblade, Sensuous Sacrifice, yeah. Or those sets of games, which when launched does get a lot of praise for accolades. Yeah, and it's an amazing game. So good on Microsoft finally taking under Ninja Theory and giving them a creative environment where they could succeed. Where they had failed before, including creating Heavenly Blade for
PS3, right?
PS3, yeah. It's one of the launch or early games.
Yeah.
Playground Games gets acquired in 2018. They're working on Forza Horizon. So Horizon 2, actually. Undead Labs, who had made State of Decay, they got acquired in 2018. Compulsion Games in 2018, which is a group of ex-Arcane Studio guys. Also, they're making We Happy Few. That is a game that is a cross-platform game that they had acquired. You can still get We Happy Few on PlayStation if you'd like. But they picked them up. Arcane, if you're not aware, is probably one of the better design development groups out there that are creating original IP.
Yeah.
And this is when we start seeing Microsoft is pivoting. It's quite clear they're pivoting from the Xbox One towards the end of the Xbox One era. With the launch of Game Pass, they start going acquisition happy. Obsidian Games is the first one that really piqued me. I was like, wait a second, Obsidian's getting picked up. Another wonderfully creative group responsible for Outer Worlds, cross-platform game. And they prior to that, they worked on a lot of RPGs. They were some of the original RPG makers. They made the sequel to KOTOR. They made the sequel to Fallout, both the original one and Fallout New Vegas. And it was another studio that struggled to find a creative space where they could get the funding they needed to be the best they could be. Mm-hmm. Which for it's kind of strange because Microsoft prior to that was not the place for that. But with this pivot, it clearly is an aim of Microsoft as a whole.
There's also the In Exile.
Yes, In Exile is another one. A small indie developer. They made Bard's Tale. 2018. That's all in 2018 that ends up happening.
They did one. That was part of one. Like they announced all of that at like one time, right? Like we just bought a whole bunch of stuff, and everyone's
Yeah,
like, "What?"
they had a series of this, like where they would be like, either there would be a round of announcements. Obsidian wasn't part of like the, hey, we're on E3 stage and we're telling you about this now, but the following E3 2019 is where they start, like, you're like, oh, this is not just a one-off, this is a trend at this point for
Yeah.
Microsoft. So at this point, under Phil Spencer as EVP, Executive Vice President, Microsoft Games finally gets called Xbox Game Studios. So Xbox is finally getting its real wing within Microsoft as a legitimate gaming group. And you're beginning to see the pushback of like the weird Microsoft enterprise teams poking their noses where Xbox as a gaming platform should be, and a positive trend for Microsoft as a company, or Xbox as a brand, I'd say. Xbox Ultimate, or Game Pass Ultimate, is announced in April 2019 for PC users only at the time. But this was a way that you could also get xCloud, and it included Xbox Live as part of its price
To
structure.
be clear, xCloud is a project name at the time for their streaming tech, and they when they announced it, they said this isn't ready yet, but when it is, it will come through the Xbox, or excuse me, wow, I just did it too. Game Pass Ultimate is the tier you'll need in order to access this stuff. If you have Game Pass Ultimate, you'll be able to access the streaming stuff.
Yeah. So that's announced in 2019. It kind of bundles their services, which for them is doing exceptionally well. It's part of the only part of the Xbox brand, with the exception of Minecraft, that is actually succeeding and exceeding the expectations, whereas the rest of the Xbox games division kind of was faltering in the Xbox One era. And then Xbox in E3 2019, they have a big wave of announcements where I'll kick it back off to you, Eric.
Yeah. So at E3 2019, the first major thing that they announced is we're working on a new console. It's called Project Scarlet. It's coming in the future. This would eventually come out to be the Xbox Series consoles. Do you remember what the code name was for the Xbox One X? There was another code. Scorpio. Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to remember. I was like, what the heck was that? Scarlet came out, and it had just sort of been that. We had a code name, everybody. Like, we can talk about some of this stuff and have a target. At E3 2019, they also announced that they were buying Double Fine, an indie darling. Tim Schafer is like the face of that company. He's also, I think, the founder of it, and is very well known in the games industry, at least amongst other developers. And it's sort of a surprise too, because they're very much have a larger IP back catalog. And have done a very good job of building games for multiple platforms. And, immediately this sparked a question of, well, what about the games that they're working on right now? Or what's going to happen to those? Are those going to get shut down? Like, are they canceled for all these other platforms, or are we going to be able to play them? As we would find out later, Microsoft did honor the existing contracts, things like, the contracts, right? Legal contracts. They did just recently ship Psychonauts 2 on the PlayStation platform.
Yeah.
So so that was.
I'd also compare Double Fine to like Obsidian and Ninja Theory. These are all like indie studios or very small developers that are highly creative, making some of the best experiences available, either by writing or clever design or whatever else. And like never, for whatever reason, found their footing. And so here is Microsoft being like, we are the group for you if you want to be creative under this, which is, like I said before, is like a 360, pun intended, I guess, from where they were before, where like they were just kind of a miserable place to develop games. And miserable is kind of hyperbole, but it was not a great place for a lot of developers to go and create games during the end of 360 Xbox One era.
Yeah. So this was sort of like, oh, okay, that's an odd choice. Um, excuse me. At the end of 2019, in December, Microsoft officially unveils at the Game Awards the Xbox Series X. Um, no word about the Series S at this point, I believe.
Yeah,
That's correct? Yeah,
they're still not
there
on that.
was
Yeah,
there was this Longhorn, I believe, kind of project or code name that starts making its way out as a leaked concept later on from SDKs. But
yeah,
at any rate, so then in 2019, after years of acquisitions but sort of little development under Microsoft-owned game studios, besides Halo, Gears of War, Minecraft, and Forza, there's the IPs that Microsoft had really been pushing during this time. The Xbox Xbox Games announces a phase of focusing on Xbox Game Studios from acquisition and growth to a phase of execution and delivery. So they spent sort of the latter years of the Xbox One period. Phil Spencer's now on board, putting a vision together. This is the acquisitions are them sort of buying the seed packets to and planting them for the next, to hopefully reap the rewards of the fruits of those efforts in the next phase. And this is them saying, oh no, we're going to be shifting to this after 2019. xCloud is, the streaming platform, is included in Game Pass Ultimate in September of 2020. EA Play is then added as part of Game Pass in September 2020, which is a bit of a surprise, but it sort of makes sense. It's a way for EA to presumably increase the number of people and subscribers that they have in their system.
Yeah, you could chalk this up to
piggybacking on Microsoft.
And you could chalk this up to launch strategy for the Xbox Series X, which at this point is announced. And you're like, oh, okay, they really want to push forward with Game Pass and what this means, but the future that we're now about now is where things get surprising.
Yeah, right. So from this point on, that was, EA is of course still its own entity, and it just said, sure, we'll do a deal with you. Here's where things get really sort of wild. In September of 2020, same month as they announced those things, this is all leading into the Xbox Series consoles launch. They announced that they have bought ZeniMax/Bethesda for $8.1 billion. This is their previous largest buy was Mojang in Minecraft for 2.1 or so, and now they've just done Bethesda and ZeniMax for 8.1. And everyone's like, "Oh man!" Same questions as before came up. Like, what's going to happen with the existing titles? Are they going to be on all the consoles? What's Microsoft doing? Is it shutting down? Are they just sucking all the oxygen out of the industry air and just building their own thing? And then sort of everyone calms down and says, oh, but there's still other major publishers and everything's going, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. December 2020, Microsoft launches the Series X and S consoles. Phil Spencer is then promoted in January of 2022. 2021 is kind of a quiet year. Phil Spencer is promoted to CEO in January of this year, so very recently. And then very shortly after that, right 2 days ago, Activision Blizzard is bought for $69 billion, which is just almost an order of magnitude larger than ZeniMax and Bethesda.
Yeah, and I'll say too, part of the buyout was or part of the larger announcement for the Blizzard Activision or Activision Blizzard buyout was in this period of time. Phil Spencer becomes CEO, and I think it's a clear growth trajectory, not for the Xbox brand, but for Phil Spencer, who's leading the Xbox brand and responsible for turning it around and turning it into something that Microsoft is actually willing to invest lots of money into. It's all on this man's shoulders. Not all, but I think it's largely this man's vision and him leading the future of what Xbox looks like. I'll also say this comes in line with this kind of rebranding of Xbox that's been happening over the past year, where they're they're coming to the table different than they did with the Xbox One, and now they're going, no, we're a game company. We're focusing on games. Games is where we want to be. Xbox is a brand we love. As the Xbox brand is becoming less synonymous with the specific hardware and more synonymous with Game Pass, Xbox Live, and now it's studio productions, not just the hardware itself, which I think is intentional, as well as them releasing this whole like 4-part retrospective series that they themselves produced. That is a like their own like documentary about themselves that helps them rebrand and change the image of who they are today versus who they were when Xbox One was failing. So so this is like this kind of interesting turn for the Xbox brand that I think is actually very well orchestrated and not happenstance or accidental. If the only thing that's happenstance is that the Xbox team has successfully been able to push Microsoft corporate from being as involved in their brand and their marketing as they were before.
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing I'd like to add here is that if you look at the Microsoft's positioning of the console over the years, their brand, I should say, with the original Xbox, they were very clearly going for core gamer audience. Like even the name Xbox is something like it's pretty edgy, and clearly targeted at, you know, the Halo player of that era. Xbox 360, they continue with it. They soften the edges of the console a little bit. I believe the default version is white instead of black as this dark edgy thing. It's a little bit lighter, a little bit more all inclusive. Sort of is kind of how I sort of view what they tried to do with it. Then we get to the Xbox One, where they didn't really have a single thesis. It was all over the place. Who are you targeting with this? Because you're in your E3 presentation, you're talking about more about television and DVR functionality than you are about actual games, right?
And anti-piracy measures that make it like cumbersome for gamers to just game.
Right. Yeah. There's like legitimately tons of people out there that are like, well, what happens if I lose power or like I lose internet or, you know, or
how do I share a game disc?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Microsoft. This is terrible. And like they just sort of seem to lose focus, not only of their vision for the console, but also of the marketing, right? Like, who are we speaking to with this? And with the Xbox Series, with their major drive into Xbox Game Pass, they've done a very good job of sort of bringing that back around. They now have one black console, the Series X, and they have one white console, the Series. They have the ability for you to sort of pick what tier you're into, how much you want to invest into it. And then with the Game Pass, which is commonly referred to as just Game Pass, not even Xbox Game Pass, which is its official name, but just Game Pass is, you know, at least in conversation, that's what you hear a lot of. That's definitely more of another softening. They want to get to the generic, like we're all gamers. That's what we're going for. And as part of that, earlier this month, they announced that Game Pass has 25 million subscribers right now. Now that's across all their tiers, but that's where things stand at the moment, which is a huge number.
It's more than the Xbox Series X has sold, which, I mean, it's not surprising.
A lot.
But it means that like the majority of Series XS owners are probably Game Pass holders, and then you have the PC side of things as well. And then anybody who's struggling on the Xbox One who can take advantage of this. But within the Xbox Game Pass package, like this year, xCloud was officially rolled into it as a streaming platform that's available to anybody who's a Game Pass subscriber and largely available on any platform you're using it on, which allows you to be an Game Pass subscriber without having a single Xbox console or PC for that matter.
Is it? I thought it was still only Game Pass Ultimate. Did they bring it for all tiers?
No, it's Ultimate still. Like you have to be in the Ultimate tier to have Game Pass, but it used to be you had to be a PC subscriber only, And within a year, or within a couple of years, they're like, the initiative is to be run on Android mobile devices as a streaming platform, not just for PC now. And now I think it's widely available to anybody who is a Game Pass Ultimate subscriber can game without a PC and without an Xbox.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's get into I guess I'll cap it by saying. I think going over this long history that they've had, if you stuck with us for whatever it is, like the hour and 20 minutes that we've been talking about this, it sort of outlines how Microsoft has evolved over time and how their previous studio acquisitions and the intent and the way they handled things was a learning experience for them that was largely only rectified with the purchase of Mojang and the adoption or bringing Phil Spencer from gaming side to management of the games division. So, or at least the from Mojang Minecraft division up to the Xbox game division. And now we see this about face going from the Xbox One generation saying we're doubling down on services, and we're going to be the ones to be the first ubiquitous game streaming platform that's there to rival Netflix for games.
Right. And notably, of course.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Notably, of course, Netflix is also trying to get into games now.
Yeah, I was going to say not to conflate Netflix's actual games side of it. But what Netflix did for movies, Xbox is trying to do for games. Finally, after many failed attempts by both Google and Amazon.
Yeah.
And is that it? I think there's been some smaller ones in there too. Nvidia as well.
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah. Steam has they have it for you can you can stream your own games from your own PC to your device within your own network,
yes,
or something. And to be fair, Sony has been doing that as well. With if you have a place, even I think for a while it was if you had a PS3, even and a Vita or a PSP,
you could do it from PS3 to Vita, and you could virtually you could use it as a virtual unit. And then with the PS4, it brought in tablets.
Yep, like iPads and stuff.
Yep. All right, so now recapping all that, what does this mean for Activision Blizzard? As a company, well, I think one of the big things that we need to talk about is what we've actually covered in a couple of our episodes is the ongoing harassment suits for Activision Blizzard. What do you think this means for Activision as a whole, especially for them as a company and them as their ongoing issues that Microsoft now seems to be adopting?
Yeah, I think this will for their. It's hard to say. A lot of this, when you start talking about the business side, you have to start thinking about the decision makers behind the company and their opinions, and this is their shareholders. They're the ones who back up Bobby Kotick. They're the CEO who's embroiled in all of this. Yes. They're the ones and they're literally looking out. They're like, their whole purpose in this is to make sure that there's are they making money, or will they make more money or less money from this decision? That's their job effectively.
Yeah.
On the board. So what does this mean for them in this period? I think, has this made the shareholders happy with all this scandal stuff? Absolutely not. They have seen their stock price go down a bunch. There is a bunch of speculation at the time that Microsoft was also watching the stock price go down and figuring out when the right time to trigger the buy would be. They've plateaued. Great. Now buy. Get them when they're at their minimum. But so there's a bit of this where the investors are going to be happy because they just made bank. They just sold the company or their their board just made a ton of money. They're going to be happy. And the company will hopefully come under Microsoft, get a little bit more. It's a merger, and I don't know what the details are going to be. No one really knows the details yet. But the hope is from us in the industry that our fellow developers, industry friends and developer family over there will see, a sea change of management style or practices or rules that help support the developers in this case. In this
Yeah,
way.
Microsoft can't really afford to
No.
have this with their brand.
Yeah.
Everybody like there's the strategic aspect of it, which is no one wanted to touch Activision with a 10-foot stick because of them being embroiled in harassment suits to their employees, and going all the way up to Kotick himself, which means that the company is rotten all the way to its core, and Kotick has been caught shielding abusers within the company.
And apparently, just to be clear, apparently issuing death threats to what's it called? His secretary, someone doing secretarial work. Death threats, allegations of death threats being issued, and all this other. It's sort of messy.
So no one wanted to touch it with a 10-foot stick, pole, whatever.
Same thing.
The point is that Microsoft, I think, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that the value of Activision is probably the lowest it will be, bar the failure of a handful of games repeatedly. Microsoft is well aware of this, going, there's not a better time to buy Activision now and buy it while we can at the price it's given. Even if no one's touching it, we can grab it. Now it's beholden to them to turn it around. Like, they cannot, as a company, continue on with the practices that were there. They're going to have to clean house. And if you're an Activision Blizzard manager that may be embroiled in some of these suits,
watch out.
Yeah, watch out, because I can only assume that there is going to be a swift cleaning out that's going to be done for Microsoft to not carry the burden of the harassment suit with it.
Right, and that sort of stain. I think as part of this, one of the things that's important to note is that Bobby Kotick, once the deal is done, and this is not scheduled to be complete and the full transition done until 2023, next year.
Yeah.
We're at the beginning of 2022, right? Like, and who knows when in 2023 this is done. I mean, they might say somewhere it's at least a year. Bobby Kotick will leave the company when this is done. He will exit. He will also exit with a massive golden parachute at $390 million. That's what was agreed to. So, he will be out of the picture, let's say. And hopefully Microsoft will have the space and capability of kind of cleaning the stain and hopefully doing right by the developers that make up the actual workhorse or work force that is Activision Blizzard.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate thing is that in order for this to have happened, it means that Kotick probably does not see comeuppance for his behaviors. But if we're honest, when was the last time an American CEO who was responsible for a giant data breach or a scandal has not left with a golden parachute?
Or didn't become president or something like that,
Right. So it's really not surprising. It's just an unfortunate side effect of this whole deal that's going to happen. I think the cool thing here is that as Activision had to operate it, and to some degree some of the larger publishers do this too, you see this repeating milking of franchises to keep them generating tons and tons of revenue for the company. With them going under Game Pass, sale metrics is no longer a metric of success. It's going to be stream metrics, which are the metrics of success. This may open up a lot of opportunity for Microsoft to revive franchises that have largely been ignored, including the Tony Hawk franchise, which was graciously given a remake, but Tony Hawk, Next has never been announced, has never been spoken of, and this sort of opportunity gives Microsoft another game to put on the Game Pass that will have a huge fan following, and doesn't have the same requirements of like being able to make $1 billion or whatever it is, like $500 million on a single sales year for a single title. So that this is good news for fans of other Activision franchises that have just been ignored.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the mechanism by which that would be surfaced is Microsoft is, I mean, anybody who has got games on that platform is going to be watching all the data metrics and trying to figure out, oh, what's popular right now. And if a ton of Game Pass players suddenly start playing, like all of the back catalog of Activision Blizzard gets, added to Game Pass, and Game Pass, that whole service, they can suddenly see like, oh man, there's actually people are playing a lot of Tony Hawk from the previous consoles. Wow, let's do another one.
Yeah.
That's sort of a very clear signal to identify.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably good news for the games that we haven't seen for a while that may get like a fair shake at getting revived. In the same way that Netflix like revived like 80s cartoons and be like, I don't know, are they popular enough? We'll find out.
Yeah, it turns out, yes. Like even if people are like, wow, I have fond memories of really enjoying He-Man as a 5-year-old, and then you're like, you try to watch any of that now, and you're like, oh, what was I on at 5 years old?
Yeah.
But they don't care about that. They're not showing you those. They might make it available, but they're banking on your good memories from that, your aged memories from that era.
Very aged.
What do you, on this sense? What, like, one last thing about in this space? What do you think this sort of means for the initiative to unionize? Right, this has been a big conversation, something almost that is driven by a lot of the harassment suits and the issues that have come through in Activision Blizzard, various spots within that company. Does this change that conversation at all, or
I mean, organizationally, no, it shouldn't. But I mean, here's what I'd say is like, for Microsoft coming in and owning this company, they're not going to be in a good position to adopt these new companies and then like unilaterally fire everybody who's trying to get a union going, because that will not look good on Microsoft. If anything, it may prove to be like a really ample time this year for the company to unionize, because the management structure is going to be like, I don't care. Microsoft's going to be coming in trying to be the good boss and trying to keep everything from being rocked for the next couple of years, to keep development on schedule and to get the games that they're kind of banking on their platform. So it's either going to be like really good for unionization, or it's just going to kind of like put a blanket over it and we're not going to hear about it anymore. And the efforts to unionize, which I think are long overdue in the game industry, are kind of going to be like quelled for the time being.
Yeah, it could also be that like, just if you are unionizing and you elect somebody to represent you in the union, and you go and try to have a conversation and represent your group, right, and say, okay, we want to negotiate such and such details of the development environment, and the work environment. That might be extra complicated, and at the very least slowed down through a period of transition like this. There is still regulatory systems that need to be, like, this has to go through regulatory systems, and even that aside, handing off, what Justin just said about the Microsoft corporate suddenly trying to take reins and being inserted into this. There's going to be a period of disruption, and guaranteed at some levels, unclearness about who answers to who and what conversations need to happen with whom and what needs to happen. So at the very least, I suspect this will slow things down on that conversation front. But I agree. If Microsoft came out and said no unions, boom, and then like half of the studios just leave, like that's not going to make anybody happy.
The only concern I'd have is this, for those people who are trying to unionize, is they can hide an awful lot of layoffs, small layoffs, Like, oh, we got rid of this studio head,
Yes.
or we got rid of this QA head because Microsoft has their own and we don't need them anymore. They could disguise unionization effort, layoffs under this,
Yeah.
and could. But if there is a large movement and there were a lot of people on board to unionize during this period of time, you may be able to find success because uh, you know Microsoft has their stock ticker to watch out for, and either movement will be bad for them. Both them taking on a large group that has unionization efforts happening, and them squashing or like laying off mass amounts of their employees that for a studio that they just acquired because of unionization efforts. It's a lose-lose situation for them. So it may be ample time and ample opportunity to make that happen at this point. Not advocating it because I know people have their jobs in line, but strategically, if it's going to happen, this is probably going to be the most apt time for it to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, so I guess kind of on that topic, what do you think of Microsoft purchasing these giant companies? I think like this is more along the lines of like, what does this mean for the industry? What does this mean for Microsoft and like their overall strategy?
Yeah, I mean, for Microsoft, I think it means, but as an extension for Microsoft, gamers that use Microsoft platforms, I think it's a good thing overall. I think that this will make people happy. With the trend, part of the reason we gave all that context at the head of the show, at the beginning of the show, was to point out that Microsoft has gone through this period of sort of self awareness, right? They tried the Sony and Nintendo approach of being a part of the conversation for their first party development studios, right? They brought in Rare and Bungie and all these other companies, Twisted Pixel and whomever, and tried to be a part of that and said, okay, look, you're going to be under us. We're going to work directly with you. We're going to make these games. They're going to be great. And then they sort of failed at it. They couldn't hit the critical success that games that are first party games from Sony and Nintendo, and in the case of Nintendo, second party games especially, seem to be able to hit basically every time. That's something that hasn't happened. And in more recent Microsoft driven releases, there's been this understanding, as especially after the Mojang buy, where they said, maybe our strength isn't in directing development, but funding and enabling the development. And we can handle marketing, like at least giving them money for marketing. They have proven not really capable of marketing themselves terribly well as like Xbox brand. They seem to sort of struggle with that from time to time. But in terms, in terms of like the way that the games they're actually developing now, it's very different. And I suspect that the ZeniMax and Bethesda titles and all of those studios, as well as the Activision Blizzard studios, those eventually may merge together under the umbrella and sort of, lose a bit of the structure. They may sort of blend together at some point, maybe. But I'm pretty sure one of the things that Microsoft is going to protect is the structures that are already in place to enable successful game development. They stopped. They're not buying individual studios right now. They're buying publishers that have their own internal studios. These are people that have built-in marketing pipelines. They have cross-team team members. They have teams that are strike teams to go in and help where it's needed to ensure that a game isn't going to be garbage when it releases, or at least it will be some measure of fun, if not great. All of these aspects, Microsoft went the tier above to make sure that when they made the purchase, they could sort of like let it do its own thing. And for them, this is filling out their content catalog and saying, great, now we're building our catalog and making it something special. This is, to me, similar to the way that, not exact, but similar to the way that before Disney Plus, Disney went out and bought Fox,
Well,
a lot of the Fox media
and it had
Star
like a
Wars.
long line of IP acquisitions,
Yeah,
which was like the Star Wars, well, Lucasfilm, which Star Wars, Indiana Jones,
yep.
Muppets, which is all Muppets. I mean, that was years ago, but
Jim Henson. Yeah,
yeah, Jim Henson Workshop,
yep,
Marvel, famously.
yep, yep.
Uh,
Marvel,
yeah,
Star Wars, Fox, like getting all of that IP,
yeah.
like just buying up
Is there
all the oxygen in the room.
and like kind of having you scratch my back, I scratch yours. The movie studio
Right.
organization is well developed and codified. So like Disney buying Fox is just them going like, well, which projects do we greenlight in the future? But letting Screen Gems or not Screen Gems, letting Searchlight exist to keep doing like funding small indie things was working for them. Like, why would you change that?
Yeah.
And it helps more content come to their catalog. And I feel this is kind of the same here with them approaching publishers and small developers that typically had to balance the creativity and finding business. They can go, hey, we can take the business part off of you. Like, this was actually a real issue with Bethesda. Like, they had partnered with an investor to get Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 launched in 76, seriously compromised as a product, and the fans took note of it. And a lot of the internal rumblings was, we had to produce something. Like, our investors wanted us something out now. And Microsoft as a game studio with the backing, or Xbox as a game publishing group led by people who have been in the game industry, backed by corporate Microsoft, may be able to give them the grace of going, we can give you the creative breathing room to create the thing that you want if you can put it into our catalog. And as long as game streaming is working and as long as our subscriber numbers are climbing, everything's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they'll be able to see, like, whatever, when the next Bethesda game comes out, which I'm blanking on the name of right now, launches, they'll be able to see how much their subscriber rates fluctuate based off of like a launch of such a an awaited title.
Yeah, are we talking about like
Starfield? That's
whatever the next Skyrim. Oh, no, Starfield, yes.
Yeah, Starfield.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's all good.
So
yeah, go ahead.
When this type of merger happens, one of the big questions becomes, it's like one of the major 3 platform holders buying up one of the major publishers. See, it feels like, oh my God, all the oxygen in the room is going away. Like there's nothing left. What is left? Which inevitably leads to the monopoly question. What is your take on that aspect of this?
I mean, I think the unfortunate part is, I mean, I'm not in favor of these larger conglomerations. I think there's the nice thing that Microsoft as a studio or as a publishing group will be able to afford, like I said, was like to allow creative endeavors to breathe, to see it come out and support the platform. And this is all dandy, but like there's bigger issues here, which is like, what is it like when one group is demanding all the creative attention from 10% of the gaming industry? Like, do you get a homogenous product? I mean, you could argue that like this is something that Sony is kind of seeing right now, where a lot of their internal studios doing this narrative-driven game drive that Sony has, producing games that are samey. They have different stories, and I mean, I personally don't think it's a problem, but there is criticism over that. It's the same thing with Marvel. Like, Marvel movies make money, but there's now like an obvious formula that's being produced or is producing movies that unless they figure out how to break from that, there's a serious issue with burnout and just like
boredom
of that like sort of creative type. I mean, I'm still going to be buying my next Marvel movie ticket, but there are legitimate concerns there, and I think the same concerns would be applied to Microsoft Studios productions. But as far as monopolies go, like, I think the unfortunate thing is that it can't be considered one. It's only 10% of the market. It's not a majority share. There are still large competitors in there, and no one's going to claim that it's some sort of monopoly within the space. I think it's a frightening trend in the market. And when you have one company that handles the creative output of 10% of the industry, uh, bad things can happen when things stop going well and things start going poorly, especially for a publicly traded
Yeah.
company.
There might be a period, might be. It's way too early to say, but based on past experiences where this type of thing happens, uh, you can get into a period of stagnation where, like, if you're the only player in the room for a huge portion of the industry, there's no incentive to change. Like, you just do what things would work last time. You do it again, and then you do it again. It's ever slight variations, but then your player base gets bored and everyone's like, oh my God, what is going on? You get into a period where that people who might look back on it and say, man, those games were not that great during that period, right?
Yeah.
Like that happens. I think I want to say that the last time that happened, at least at a large scale, almost tanked the industry, which was when Atari sort of like pumped and dumped tons of small, crappy games into the market. And then everyone was basically saying like, oh, home gaming is done, until, of course, Nintendo stepped in.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And I think you kind of risk this going forward. It's just like, it's not, I don't think it's going to be the collapse of gaming in general, like, this type of gaming. If anything, it's good. Like, the movement towards streaming breaks games out of the necessary purchase price of like a $400 or $500 console into the, if you want to pay the service price, you can get it. These are good things for gaming in general. This means, like, we may see this sort of thing that we saw with Netflix, where suddenly there's a huge investment in the content, and now suddenly a lot of more creatives are being able to get funded to see their creative vision done. Those are good things, right? Like, these are all great things. It's great as long as there's not a monopoly in the space, and B, like, it is good as long as the going is good. And as soon as that retracts, like, there will be a reaction, and that reaction tends to be very bad in the creative space. And, well, it tends to be consistently bad in the creative space. Like, when you have a contraction, when suddenly your sales aren't doing as well as you can, the sort of pressures on the creativity goes up, and you kind of get into this lull point where creativity is not good. You see, like, this is what happened with EA, right? Like, EA is a prime example of a company that was known for creating a bunch of cool stuff. They got into like this rut where they're like, well, we know these games make money, so let's keep making these games, and we're not willing to go into other spaces. Instead, we're going to look at ways of extracting more money out of the games that already do things. So, like, let's put loot boxes in, let's do this, and let's do that. This extracts more money from our successful games. And with that, left fans going like, I don't like this, I never wanted that. And there's still us who are going, wait, what happened to like your creative titles? And we're seeing this now with EA again. Like, EA has sort of reinvested in these ideas, but there was like a good PS3, like late PS3 era, early PS4 era, where EA as a company was really struggling to find a way to be creative and financially successful, and that led to one major publisher in the industry to create like games that weren't really that enticing for a while. But now, now we're turning a new page, and we got, Knights of the, or not Knights of the Old Republic, Jedi Fallen Order, and we're getting Dead Space Resurrected, and it doesn't seem like the money interests are really impeding their ability to do those things.
Yeah, I agree, and we'll see. Like, this could be a period where a lot of the major studios and major companies have gone through periods of like hubris. It seems sometimes, like, just in ego.
Yeah, like infallibility. We can do no wrong, and then that's
right.
when your audience is like, you're doing lots of wrong. So
yeah. Sony had it arguably with the PS3, and the like, everyone was going to want to throw $600 at us. Like those comments when they first announced how ridiculously expensive that was going to be. And then, the difficulty of developing for that platform, and that reaction to that was the PS4, which was, that's when we got Mark Cerny and Sony ate humble pie and came back with some awesome stuff. Humble pie seems to have made its way to EA, and now Microsoft may be taking a piece of the humble pie. So, like this if the past experiences have proved true, at least in the examples that we just gave, this could very well turn out to be something really big and positive. It also runs the risk of more ego and whatever coming into play, and we need to go back and find more humble pie at some point.
Yeah.
But it's trend. This is industry over a long period of time. You're going to see these ebbs and flows. What do you think that this means for sort of back catalog content? Right now, a lot of Activision Blizzard games are available on, say, Sony platforms and Nintendo platforms. What are we with the existing content? Are we going to see that still get pushed out there and just always be available on Game Pass, or is Microsoft slowly going to start pulling stuff down from the other markets to incentivize, if you want to play that game, bring it, you have to come over to us?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has implications to like what happens in the industry as a whole, because it's like where does Microsoft see the value? Like as of right now, there's a real need for them to get content onto the Game Pass to make it as attractive as a platform as possible to justify the purchasing of a 68, $70 billion company to put into the Microsoft brand, right? Like they have to be able to justify that. And part of this is whatever strategy makes the most sense for them to get people to adopt Game Pass as a platform is great. But does that mean that like having physical copies being distributed on multiple platforms takes away from the Game Pass? Like if Game Pass provides value, which is you pay us whatever, $10 a month, and you can play any of these games, jump on Game. This is the only way you're going to be able to do it. Jump on Game Pass. But if you'd like to buy a $70 game as a hard copy and get it on the PlayStation, all right. Like, given the way the Xbox and the PlayStation are hard architecture-wise, like similar to each other, like I don't see the long-term harm in that. I see a short-term maybe pivot where they first need to get people onto the Game Pass platform, and then the cause of concern of making a game available on the PlayStation as a physical copy or as a digital copy is not a big deal. It just will never make it onto a competitive Sony streaming platform. Like that's what I think is going to be the case.
I mean, I agree. I think as well, like my look at this is sort of, if Microsoft spent, as you said, a huge chunk of cash, and they're going to need to recoup some of that. You can't just spend a ton of money in business and then change everything so that the revenue source, a lot of the money driver income for that company, you just take it all away, like right at the get-go. You can't just say like, okay, so like you're getting 60% of your sales from, or 80% of your sales from Nintendo and Sony platforms. Those are stopping. Expand what you have in that less 20%. Like, they have balance sheets and stuff that show all of these numbers and these valid these things, and Microsoft isn't just going to throw away all of that, however much percentage that is. So what I would see going forward is, in the short term, Microsoft's marching orders to the heads of this portion of Xbox Game Studio now, or Xbox Games, is that back catalog that you have. Anything that's compatible with Windows or Xbox, like any of the Xbox consoles, is going to Game Pass. It will all be on Game Pass, which, if you're a Game Pass subscriber, if you're looking at it and saying like, is there something for me in here? Like, yes. Yes, you're going to, boom, there you go. And I have another interesting question, but we'll come back to that. In the meantime, those, that's a huge, huge plus for the Game Pass ecosystem right there. I could see them saying that, like, look, the Switch will keep selling the games that we've sold. The PS5, PS4 will keep selling the games that we've sold and that are on there now. New titles, if we have contracts and whatever agreements, like, yes, we'll honor those. Once that's all cleared and done, all of everything is just Game Pass. And then maybe over time, as the long tail sales drop below a certain threshold, they'll just take them down. Given enough time. We're seeing 5 sales a quarter for this small game that was released 15 years ago. It's still available on the Switch, but no one can find it because the Switch has a bajillion games. We're just going to take it down.
I
Right?
mean,
Like,
I think there's two mechanics here at work that address this kind of, which is one is to not be the bad guy in the game industry, which they're looking more and more like with these acquisitions. To not come off as the bad
yeah,
guy, you can't take things away that were already there for you. And there's a
right.
fine line there, which is like uh, the latest Call of Duty is on PlayStation. Do we remove Call of Duty from? It's like no, they won't, because that'd be taking something away. That's a problem. Does the next standalone Call of Duty game get released on PlayStation? That may be something that they go no, or there's a year exclusivity on Game Pass, and if you want to play it a year before all your friends, you want to do that. But I mean, there's also other things, which is like, well, if you remove the PS5 players from the competitive landscape, like, does that make a better game? Um,
Yeah.
those sort of things. And there's also the persistent games, like there's like the Call of Duty, like I don't remember what it's called, but like Warzone. Yeah, it's Warzone.
Yeah.
That is already on PlayStation. Like if they stop supporting that, that's taking something away. So I imagine those games will be supported, but next year's Call of Duty, maybe not. Crash Bandicoot next, they might not do that. Like they may be a Game Pass platform or on Game Pass / Xbox platforms only. But I cannot see this as a long-term position because I do not see Sony just being like, we're no longer a console manufacturer, or Nintendo doing that. Like there are niche markets in there that can be pretty sizable that Microsoft would be dumb to just abandon entirely. But
Yeah.
and like the other thing that's at play here is that, and I've said this over and over again, like Xbox hardware is not Xbox. Like that is not the Xbox brand. As much as people like are used to saying that, like I cannot not imagine that this is actually the movement, the like space here. There's just straddling the line between the old way of thinking and the new way of thinking, and really it's Game Pass, the service that's the important thing here, and releasing
Yeah.
things on consoles isn't a problem. Releasing things on multiple streaming platforms would be. They have to
Yeah.
have the value and make sure that the value is in Game Pass as a platform.
I mean, I can imagine a future where there is no next Xbox console.
Yeah.
Like we're done. And what happens is Microsoft says, okay, for all of our studios, you're going to be making games for Game Pass. You will have the option to make your game for the Switch 2 or 3 or whatever, and for the PlayStation, but it has to be on Game Pass at least. And if Microsoft can get, if they're like, yo, we're exiting hardware, we also want to make this be, we're putting Game Pass on TVs, on all this other stuff. Sony, Nintendo, do you want to maybe have like a front end for Game Pass on your consoles? Like, maybe I can see Microsoft, or Nintendo, particularly as Japanese companies, Sony and Nintendo having that as a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
But eventually it could be a thing where that's just like sort of a, Sony has the Netflix app. They might as well just have the Game Pass app. And then at least you're on the PlayStation. Like you're spending time on the PlayStation. So like, who knows? This is sort of a direction that it seems Microsoft has been moving to since partway through, like the reevaluation during the Xbox One life cycle, where they were like, two things came together. They said, oh my God, Xbox One is flopping. And at the same time, Azure, Microsoft's kind of cloud system, was coming online and proving to be, something very capable and a player in the market. So they had this great opportunity to say like, okay, well, what if we put all these pieces together in a way and made a new service? What could this look like in the future?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said you had another interesting question.
Yeah. So that interesting question is like, you're getting Activision Blizzard, one of Blizzard's biggest cash cows for, at least for a good chunk of their life was and has been, which is a subscription service. Is that something that could make its way to Game Pass, or is that going to be its own separate?
I mean, I don't see why it couldn't. I mean, they did this with Minecraft, right? Like, I think the new Minecraft accounts had to go through a Microsoft account. they honor the
Yeah.
old ones, but eventually it's like if you want to be a new Minecraft subscriber or like you want your own Minecraft account, it's now going through Microsoft.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of like Xbox Live versus Battle.net in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I could very well see that like going like, oh, you want WoW, like it's on Game Pass. Like you want to keep playing WoW, like and opposed to paying like a one time or like whatever the subscription is, it transitions over to Game Pass, or they allow
Yeah.
like basically you can continue to be on this, you can pay what you want, but here's better value, and if you don't transition over that, that's on you. But we'll entertain it for like another 5 years, or like the smarter thing would be is like give that game a massive injection into a massive injection of like bringing it back from where it is currently, which was a huge cash cow. I think it's still profitable. It's just not the same thing it used to be. But like again, this is like an IP that
Well, they,
Microsoft can be like, we're resurrecting this.
yeah, I mean, Blizzard themselves, Activision Blizzard themselves have been resurrecting World of Warcraft already. They have WoW Classic, right? Like, and they've been slowly doing releases like the same way that they had done, of their expansions, the same way they had originally done them. So,
Yeah.
and also, as I understand it, tweaking things to be perhaps more in line with the type of game that the person who wants to play Classic, that game that they want to play, they're maintaining that without a lot of the dramatic changes. As you said, it's a very different game. Like standard WoW is very different than what it had been when it originally launched.
Yeah. But I could see this all getting scooped up into what is Game Pass, and them offering all branches to like the legacy players. But the push would be to get everybody. The push for them, the push for the $68 billion or $69 billion acquisition is for them to go, we are moving as many people as we can from the people who play these games to Game Pass owners that can still play those games. So they're going to leverage whatever they can without really pissing off their gamer base. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We've gone for about 2 hours now, so why don't we call it here? Do you have any last thoughts?
My only last thought is that like we'd be interested to see how this develops. The next year is going to certainly be interesting in the game industry. At least on the business side.
For certain.
So we'll see.
It's a shakeup, and I think like with during shakeup years, with that like the entire industry has to reevaluate itself. There's the most interesting things that happen. There's some tragedies where you like lose companies that you wish were still around, but I think overall it's going to drag the game industry to a place where it's going to be more profitable, and we're all going to have to accept some pretty significant changes to the way that we understood the game industry.
Yeah. How about you? Is that it for your?
That's probably about as good a summary as any.
Okay. Great.
Well, thanks everybody for watching.
Okay.
If you did, we'll see you next week, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Twitch and YouTube.